Hello and welcome to Jack Forey's and Ben Gleason's International Relations TED Talk. So today we are going to be addressing one of the premier sustainability goals of the United Nations, one which will have a very heavy impact on the, the duration of human history and the next century. So the goal is affordable and clean energy throughout the world. And one of the big things about affordable and clean energy is that there is a false idea especially in the United States, that affordable energy cannot be clean, or the inverse, that clean energy cannot be affordable, that the high costs are going to be permanent and similar things like that. And today we're here to tell you that that is not the case. We have some examples from different countries and some of the more implicit costs and stuff like that to prove that the costs of not embracing clean energy make clean energy affordable. If Ben would like to extrapolate further with that.
For sure. So like Jack said, everything is relative, and the reason renewable energy can be both affordable and clean is because the costs that would otherwise ensue if we do not act. And that cost is $44 trillion. Isn't that wonderful? So if we do not act, if we do nothing about climate change and continue upon our current path, there will be a $44 trillion cost to the global economy by 2060. And that will mainly be in GDP reductions and other costs and other hindrances to the global economy by then. And so there's that big looming number, but many people say that climate change is only a long-term issue. It's not going to affect us until we're all dead, so we shouldn't worry about it now. And that's simply not true. It's already affecting the US alone. And that cost this year in 2018 has been $1 billion in weather damages that are estimated to have been incurred because of climate change. So that's what some of the short-term costs look like. And as far as long-term goes, well, that's even worse. There's a small chance that $1 trillion in property damages in the US will incur because, well, a lot of our coastline will be underwater. And if that happens in around 2100, that's the rough estimate of when it could/will happen.
According to NOAA.
Yep, that will be $1 trillion. So that's why we do need affordable and clean energy. That's what will happen if we don't have affordable and clean energy. And so, that's the problem. And Jack's going to talk about one of the first solutions we found. So, Jack's going to talk about a case study in Iceland that we can use in the U.S.
Thank you, Ben. Ben and I both attend Lodge Valley High School, so we thought it would be apt to discuss how the Vikings are handling this global challenge. And our friends to the northeast in Iceland have found a very unique method of dealing with the affordable and clean energy problem. So Iceland sits atop a tectonic rift, a place where two tectonic plates meet, and right now they're coming apart. So, in the way the Earth works, there's the very thin crust, which is made up of plates, but beneath that is the mantle, which is a large, convexing, extremely hot part of the Earth. So, because the two plates are coming apart at Iceland, it is an area of extreme geothermal activity. So let's analyze that word a little bit. Geo meaning earth, thermal meaning heat. So there is heat coming from the earth in Iceland. Now, this has given them some very unique opportunities. They have figured out a way to generate electricity using this heat, and it's through a method known as geothermal energy production. How it works is it's actually kind of similar to fracking, but with very, very different results. So you take water and they drill boreholes deep, a couple hundred meters into the earth, and then they blast water into it, and the water goes through, absorbs some of the heat from the stones that it's going by, and then it comes back up. And when it comes back up, it is extremely hot because, as I said, it has taken in a lot of the heat of the geothermal activity going on underneath Iceland. So that produces a massive amount of electricity, and today 26.2% of Iceland's energy is produced through this method. Entirely earth-driven, very natural, very affordable too. Because once you build a geothermal plant, the initial costs can be high, but geothermal energy is a very, very reliable and consistent form of energy, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But so you have very big pluses. Now, even some of the negatives of geothermal energy production, the Icelandic people have found solutions to. Well, the main problem, aside from some high starting costs, is emissions from the plants. And so, because as the water comes back up, it has with it some of the gases from the ground where it was. And those two main gases are carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide. But they have found two main solutions to this. The first being there's the Carbon Recycling Initiative in Iceland, which takes carbon dioxide and some of the other emitted gases from the geothermal energy production process, and they're actually able to turn it into methanol, which is a alternative energy form of, it's the number one thing that natural gas in the United States has turned into. So to give you an idea, it's like an alternative fuel similar to gasoline, but with 20% less carbon emissions from its burning. So they're producing alternative fuel from their alternative energy process. So it's a stacking of alternative energy production methods. And then another thing that they're using to solve the emission problem is when they have the gases emitted, they will take them and mix them in with the hot water that comes from them and blast it back into the ground, but this time there's no escape for the gases and for the water. And interestingly enough, when they do this, the carbon fixes back into the rocks and it actually forms calcite. So they are literally turning greenhouse gases back into stones that are going back into the ground. And so that's known as, there's a company called CarbFix, and so, just very big. It takes about 6 months to form these stones from putting it back on the ground, and it's just an incredible process. And, some of the uses of geothermal energy, especially the newly, so now that geothermal energy has had its major negatives taken away, the positives are incredible. Iceland now, with their new geothermal energy, has, the Blue Lagoon. If you've ever seen pictures of Iceland, you've probably seen the iconic Icelanders, swimming in the big heated pool. The main one, the Blue Lagoon, is powered entirely by geothermal energy. Then you also have restaurants where you'll go in and the restaurant is powered entirely by that heated water. So they'll have pots going and stuff like that, and going on geothermal energy, and they just number of stuff. And I found this one especially funny. The whole problem with climate change is the overabundance of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. But now geothermal in Iceland has allowed them to start building smaller greenhouses of their own, which they're now using to produce more food in Iceland. Iceland isn't the best place to be growing stuff like tomatoes and stuff like that. That was in a documentary I was watching. But now they have greenhouses, which means you can start growing food in Iceland, which means you don't have to burn the fossil fuels to import food to Iceland, say by air, by boat. So it is just compounding, and it's going very well for them. And now 99% of Icelandic energy is done renewably, and it is clean, it's affordable, it has helped Iceland's economy. Now they can diversify. The massive amount of energy created by this has now led to an aluminum mining industry in Iceland, which now makes up 40% of their exports, and it's just very, very good for the Icelandic. It is affordable and it is clean. Now, I said 99% of Iceland's energy is renewable, and you probably remember that 26% of their energy is geothermal. So what is the remaining 75%? Well, to talk about the wave so to speak, which is hitting the Scandinavian world, is hydroelectric, and Ben will discuss that.
For sure. So hydroelectric is less obscure than geothermal. It's a fairly mainstream thing. People have heard of it. You think of dam, you think of hydroelectric. But how do dams work? How do hydroelectric dams work? You see these massive sprawling dams that will block up a whole river and create a massive reservoir, and you think it might be complicated, but on the contrary, it actually really isn't. So you have this massive dam structure that blocks off the flow of a river and creates a reservoir. So at the very base of the dam, there's a little filter that allows only a certain fixed amount of water to flow through, so that's pretty high pressure and flowing at a rapid rate. And then there's a tunnel that runs underneath the dam, in which is a turbine. And this quickly moving water will spin the turbine, and then will be filtered out of the dam. And then the energy from the spinning of the turbine will be channeled into electricity and shipped off to homes. So this has become increasingly prevalent in Norway. Norwegians are known for their fjords and their beautiful rivers. So they've really taken advantage of this by embracing hydroelectric power. And they don't just use it to power a fraction of their economy or of their country with maybe a quarter or even half. 98% of Norway's energy comes from hydroelectric power. And the best thing about hydroelectric power is that there really aren't any downsides to it. With Norway's 1,000 plus dams, hydroelectric plants, they really don't have any environmental impacts. The only negative thing about it is the cost. There's a very high upfront cost to installing these massive sprawling dams. But like we talked about earlier, it's really affordable when it's compared to these huge looming figures that will come upon us if we don't do things like embrace hydroelectric power or geothermal energy.
And it's also affordable in the long run, because once you establish these things, a river won't run out for quite some time. The Earth's energy will never run out in human civilization's time span, whereas an oil well can be, drawn out within decades. So it's a much longer scale affordability. Once you build it, it is a reliable money-making thing, which again goes to the affordability.
Precisely. And even in the short run, even after you pay that huge maybe $1 or $1 billion check to build your dam, it's going to cost next to nothing in comparison to that to just keep it running and keep it producing electricity. So it's going to pay for itself. And there's very few environmental impacts. One of the only negatives I can think of besides the cost is that some places, when you dam up a river, it's going to have some implications for the river ecosystem. Like it's going to obstruct the natural flow of the river so that there's no longer going to be as big of a river downstream, and there's going to be this massive lake upstream, so that the animals that previously lived there are going to be displaced, and the aquatic population downstream is also going to be displaced. And this has been an especially large problem in the western United States, where there's native migratory salmon populations, so they can't do their native migratory routes because of the fact that the dams are there and that their rivers are dwindling. And some places don't even consider dams a renewable or hydroelectric energy or renewable energy source, like California, for example, because of the fact that it has this effect on ecosystems. But I think that all things considered, the damage to ecosystems is something that it can be overlooked, given the fact that the energy yield from hydroelectric dams is massive, and it's all things considered very cheap.
And it's certainly pales in comparison to the ecological disaster that would come if renewable energies were not further embraced globally.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what hydroelectric power is like in Norway, but how can it help us in the United States? Well, actually, as a matter of fact, we do have hydroelectric dams, just very few of them. Only 6% of the U.S.'s energy is made up of hydroelectric power, and only about 30% of our renewable energies comes from hydroelectric power. So it's not really very prevalent in the U.S. We have our famous Hoover Dam, and a few others, but besides that, it's really not that big of a thing here. But this is not from lack of infrastructure. We have 80,000 unpowered dams. So dams that are just there creating reservoirs or rerouting rivers. They're just there, having no practical use to us. So it wouldn't even cost that much compared to building a new dam to convert these dams to hydroelectric power. In doing this, at the reduced cost because you don't have to rebuild the dam, would provide 12,000 megawatts of power per year, which, for reference, 1 megawatt of power can power 1,000 homes. So 12,000 of them can do quite a bit more at 12 million homes. So just converting our current infrastructure, we could power 12 million more homes per year. And that's not even taking into account what would happen if we built new and improved dams like China's been doing. So yeah, and that's how it could be applied. That's how Norway's strategy could be applied to the U.S. And Jack's going to talk about how geothermal could be applied to the U.S. as well.
Thank you. So to access my little my little info box here. So right now, hydroelectric is a small part of the U.S. energy picture. Geothermal is far smaller. But that seems natural, you might think, because the United States, unlike Iceland, is no land of volcanoes and stuff like that. Well, you would be incorrect. While the U.S. might not have as many active volcanoes as Iceland, the United States is a place with incredible tectonic activity, especially out in the west. So what I found is that the U.S. could produce 32 million times more geothermal energy, which would be an incredible addition to America's energy, output, which would reduce the need for fossil fuels. And so it's hard to gauge exactly because the initial technological costs are somewhat high. But if we could break through some of those costs of beginning the barriers for the implementation of new geothermal plants, the USGS estimates that roughly half of America's energy needs could be met by the geothermal capabilities, the geothermal potential of the United States. There are massive amounts of energy there's a massive amount of energy underground which the U.S. could be tapping into to help deal with this problem. And like I said, geothermal energy, the Icelandic people have found a solution for the emissions it creates, and so past that, it has no major drawbacks. The idea that it causes earthquakes has largely been found to be untrue, and similar things to that. So it is so these plants, once constructed, there is nothing slower on Earth than geologic processes. So once they're ready, once they're good to go, they will not run out, and it will be a reliable source of energy for a time span which is incomprehensible on a short-scale business sense of thinking. So to conclude, the costs being undertaken right now are too large to ignore. While it may be expensive in the short run, these are just two ways that we can shift to affordable energy, affordable and clean energy. If we don't make the shift, it will not be, the affordability in the short run of keeping dirty fuels will be dwarfed. The cost will just be so much larger than the short-term costs of implementing systems like this or different systems like solar or wind or biomass, which are being implemented across the world right now. So yeah, we call out to you to rally for support for geothermal, for hydroelectric, for any different source of energy that we can embrace in our country. Thank you.